The restaurant glowed with a golden hue as soft jazz music floated through the air. The candles flickered gently on the pristine white tablecloth, casting warm shadows across the polished crystal glasses. Outside, the Denver snow fell in delicate swirls, painting the bustling streets with a serene quietness. I had planned this evening for months, a celebration of our 10th anniversary. It was supposed to be perfect. Sitting across from me, Emily adjusted her napkin for what felt like the 10th time, avoiding my eyes. Her usually lively smile was absent, replaced by a faint, distant expression. I tried to ignore the unease creeping into my chest, focusing instead on the small box tucked into my pocket. The custom bracelet I'd commissioned for her had taken weeks to craft. Her initials intertwined with mine, adorned with our birthstones. It was meant to symbolize the bond we had built over a decade. Yet tonight, she seemed miles away. As the waiter poured wine into her glass, Emily cleared her throat. "James," she began, her voice softer than usual, "there's something I need to talk to you about." The weight of her tone silenced the jovial chatter around us. I put down my glass, my heart quickening. This wasn't the voice of someone reminiscing about shared memories or dreaming of the future. It was the voice of someone on the brink of delivering a blow. "What's on your mind, Em?" I asked, keeping my tone light despite the knot forming in my stomach. She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the tablecloth. "I've been thinking a lot. About us." The knot tightened. "Okay," I said, trying to remain composed. Her eyes darted briefly to mine before settling on the candle between us. "I feel like I've been missing something in my life. Like there's a part of me I haven't had the chance to explore." "Missing something?" I repeated, struggling to process her words. "What are you talking about?" Emily took a deep breath, her shoulders stiffening. I think I want us to try something different. I want us to have an open relationship." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My vision blurred for a moment as her words echoed in my mind. Open relationship? The term was so foreign, so completely out of place in our life that I couldn't even respond. "I've been thinking about this for a while," she continued, her voice steady but her hands trembling. "I feel like I need to discover who I am outside of being your wife. This isn't about not loving you, it's about finding myself." Her words sliced through me like a cold wind. I stared at her, speechless. How could this be happening? Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating our journey, not unraveling it. "Emily," I finally managed, my voice strained, "do you realize what you're saying? We've built a life together, a marriage based on trust and commitment. And now you want to date other people?" Her gaze faltered, but she didn't back down. "I don't want to lose you, James. I still love you, but I can't ignore this part of me anymore. I'm not asking for a divorce. I just need time to figure things out." I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the urge to yell. The waiter appeared at my side, oblivious to the tension, and placed a delicate dessert in front of us. A chocolate fondant, her favorite. The irony was suffocating. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you bring this up on our anniversary at dinner?" "I thought it would be better to discuss this in a neutral place," she said, her tone almost apologetic. "I didn't want things to get out of hand." Neutral? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The effort I'd put into planning this evening felt like a cruel joke. My fingers twitched toward the box in my pocket, but I left it there, knowing it no longer mattered. "I need some air," I said abruptly, pushing my chair back. "James, wait," she began, but I raised a hand to stop her. I walked past the rows of tables, past the smiling couples, past the violinist who played a tune I could no longer hear. The cold air outside hit me like a slap, but it did little to numb the pain tearing through my chest. The bracelet burned in my pocket, a reminder of what this night could have been. Leaning against the railing, I stared at the snow-covered streets below. My breath fogged in the icy air, each exhale heavier than the last. I had no idea how we'd gotten here, but one thing was clear. Our marriage would never be the same. The drive home felt longer than usual, the city lights blurring into streaks as I struggled to process the evening's events. Emily's words echoed in my mind, each one tearing at the foundation of our marriage. The bracelet I had spent weeks designing sat heavy in my pocket, a stark reminder of how drastically the night had unraveled. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the warmth of the home we had built together felt like a cruel illusion. Emily was already inside when I walked through the door. She stood in the living room, her arms crossed defensively, her expression guarded. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension. For a moment I considered walking past her and heading straight to bed, but the questions boiling inside me refused to be ignored. "What was that, Emily?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "An open relationship? Are you serious?" She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the framed photo of us on the mantel. "James, I know it's hard to understand, but I've been feeling this way for a long time." "Hard to understand?" I repeated, my tone rising. "You want to date other people while staying married to me. What exactly is there to understand?" "I don't want to hurt you," she said softly, but the words felt hollow. "This isn't about you. It's about me and what I need to feel fulfilled." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "And what about me, Emily? What about our marriage, our life together? Or does that not matter anymore?" Her lips tightened, and for the first time, anger flashed in her eyes. "Of course it matters, James. But I can't keep pretending that I'm happy when I'm not. I've lost myself in this marriage, and I need to figure out who I am." The words hit me like a blow. "Lost yourself?" I asked, incredulous. "We built this life together. Every decision, every sacrifice, none of that meant anything to you?" "That's not fair," she snapped. "I've given up just as much as you have. But I can't keep ignoring this part of me. I need space to breathe, to figure out what I want." "And you think dating other people is the answer?" I shot back. "That's not finding yourself, Emily. That's running away." She looked away, her shoulders slumping under the weight of the conversation. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I'm not leaving you," she said finally. "I still love you, James. I need something more." I stared at her, searching for the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built my life around, but in that moment, she felt like a stranger. "You've already made up your mind, haven't you?" I asked quietly. Emily didn't answer. Her silence said more than words ever could. Without another word, I turned and headed for the guest bedroom. The bed was unmade, the room cold and uninviting, but it felt more welcoming than the shared space I couldn't bring myself to return to. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, the weight of her words pressed down on me. I thought about the life we had built, every memory, every milestone, every promise we had made. It all felt fragile now, like a house of cards teetering on the edge of collapse. My mind raced with questions. Was there something I had missed? A moment when things had started to fall apart? Or had I been blind to the cracks all along? By the time dawn broke, I hadn't slept. The sunlight streaming through the window felt like a cruel reminder that the world kept turning, even as mine crumbled. I got up and headed to the kitchen, hoping a strong cup of coffee would help me make sense of everything. Emily was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of tea. She looked up as I entered, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence between us louder than any argument. "I think we should talk," she said finally. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitterness mirroring the taste in my mouth. "Talk about what?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "About us," she said, her voice hesitant. "About where we go from here." I set the cup down, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Where we go from here," I repeated. "Emily, do you even hear yourself? You're the one who dropped this bomb on me, and now you want to talk about where we go from here?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were for me or for herself. "James, I don't want to lose you. I want us to work through this." "Work through what, Emily?" I asked, my voice breaking. "You can't have it both ways. You can't expect me to sit here while you explore other relationships and pretend everything's fine." She opened her mouth to respond but stopped, her words caught in her throat. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. "I need time to think," I said finally, turning away. "I don't know what this means for us, but I can't do this right now." As I walked out of the kitchen, I felt the weight of her gaze on my back. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison, each room echoing with the ghosts of what used to be. The morning after our tense exchange, I left the house feeling like a stranger in my own life. Emily's words replayed in my mind, looping endlessly. I need to find myself. I want us to work through this. How could she expect me to process such a contradiction? I didn't even know what working through this meant. Work was a welcome distraction, but not a solution. Numbers and spreadsheets couldn't drown out the growing ache in my chest, or the gnawing questions that refused to leave me alone. What had I missed? Had there been signs I'd ignored? Or worse, had I become the problem without realizing it? During lunch, I called David, my closest friend and a man I trusted implicitly. As a lawyer, he had a knack for cutting through emotional fog with practical advice. "David, I need to talk," I said as soon as he answered. "Sounds serious," he replied. "Let's meet at the roastery in half an hour." The coffee shop was quiet, its warm, earthy aroma a small comfort as I sat across from him. I told him everything: Emily's bombshell, her vague justifications, and my growing suspicion that there was more to her story than she was letting on. David listened carefully, his expression neutral but his sharp eyes missing nothing. When I finished, he leaned back, crossing his arms. "James, I'm sorry you're going through this," he said. "But if Emily's serious about wanting to see other people, you need to protect yourself." "Protect myself?" I asked, frowning. "She's talking about stepping outside the marriage, and that has consequences, legal, emotional, and financial. You need to start thinking strategically, not just emotionally." His words stung, but they made sense. As much as I hated the idea, I knew he was right. "What do you suggest?" "First, document everything," he said firmly. "Keep a record of her spending, her behavior, and any conversations you have about this open relationship nonsense. Second, I think you should consider hiring a private investigator." A private investigator? The thought felt extreme, but David held up a hand. "Not to be vindictive," he clarified. "But if she's already seeing someone, or plans to, you'll need evidence to protect your interests if things escalate to divorce." The word divorce hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even let myself think that far ahead, but the reality of our situation loomed large. "Do you know anyone reliable?" I asked after a pause. David nodded. "I'll connect you with Megan Fields. She's thorough and discreet." That evening, I sat in the guest bedroom staring at my phone for what felt like hours before finally dialing Megan's number. Her calm, professional demeanor put me at ease as I explained my situation. "I'll start by tracking her activities outside the home," Megan said. "If there's anything to find, I'll uncover it." Her confidence was both reassuring and unsettling. Did I really want to know what Emily was doing? The next few days passed in a blur. Emily was distant but cordial, as if nothing had changed. Her routine seemed normal: work, errands, and the occasional evening out with Jessica. But Megan's updates painted a different picture. "She's been frequenting a bar called the High Line," Megan informed me during our second call. "It's a known spot for singles. She's also been seen with a man, Ethan Grant, a real estate agent." Hearing another man's name in connection to my wife sent a chill down my spine. The ache in my chest deepened, laced with anger. "Do you have proof?" I asked. "I'll send you photos tonight," Megan replied. When the email arrived, I opened it with trembling hands. The images were clear: Emily laughing with Ethan at a dimly lit bar, their body language intimate. In one photo, his hand rested lightly on her back. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling a mix of devastation and fury. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the realization that she had been living a double life while I tried to save what was left of our marriage. The next morning, I showed David the photos. He studied them carefully before nodding. "This gives you leverage," he said. "But the question is, what do you want to do next?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to confront her right now, but another part of me feels defeated." "Don't act on impulse," David advised. "Take your time to process this. Whatever you decide, make sure it's the right choice for you, not just a reaction to the pain." That night, as I lay in the guest bed, I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. Confronting Emily would bring everything to a head, but was I ready for that? Or was it better to wait, to gather more evidence and approach this with a clear mind? The cracks in our foundation were no longer just fractures, they were gaping chasms, and I didn't know if they could ever be repaired. The photos Megan had sent stayed on my phone, haunting me every time I unlocked the screen. Emily's laugh, her closeness to Ethan, the way she leaned into him, it was all there, undeniable. Each image felt like another crack in what was left of my heart. For the next 2 days I avoided confronting her, unsure if I was ready for the storm that would surely follow. Instead, I buried myself in work, trying to find solace in the predictable rhythm of spreadsheets and financial forecasts. But avoidance wasn't a solution. The evidence Megan had uncovered made it clear. Emily had already crossed lines she could never uncross. On the third evening, Megan called with more updates. "She met Ethan again last night," she said, her tone steady and professional. "They were at the High Line for a couple of hours, then left together. I followed them to his apartment." My stomach twisted. "Did she stay the night?" "No," Megan replied. "She was there for about an hour, then drove back home, but their body language leaves little doubt about the nature of their relationship." Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I thanked her and ended the call, my thoughts spiraling. Emily's betrayal was no longer a suspicion, it was a fact. That night, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Emily," I said, my voice calm but firm, "who is Ethan Grant?" Her fork froze midway to her mouth, her eyes widening in shock. "What?" "You heard me," I said, leaning forward. "Who is Ethan Grant? And don't bother denying it. I know everything." She set her fork down, her hands trembling slightly. "James, Don't lie to me," I interrupted, my voice sharper now. "I've seen the photos. I know you've been meeting him, so tell me the truth. What's going on between you two?" For a moment she looked like she might deny it, but then her shoulders slumped in defeat. "We've been talking," she admitted quietly. "That's all." "Talking?" I repeated, my anger simmering just below the surface. "Emily, do you take me for a fool? I've seen the way you look at him in those photos. This isn't just talking." She looked away, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "It started innocently. He's a friend, someone I could talk to about things I couldn't talk to you about." "And now?" I pressed. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, my voice laced with bitterness. "You didn't just betray me, Emily. You betrayed us. Everything we built together." "I never stopped loving you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I let out a bitter laugh. "Love? Is that what you call this? Meeting another man in secret, lying to my face?" She wiped at her tears, but I felt no sympathy. "I was lost, James," she said. "I didn't know how to tell you what I was feeling. Ethan, he just listened. He made me feel seen." "And I didn't," I shot back. "Emily, I've been here every day working my ass off to give us a good life. I've been faithful, supportive, patient. What more could you possibly want?" Her silence was deafening. After a long pause, I stood, the chair scraping against the floor. "I can't do this right now," I said, my voice cold. "If you want to find yourself, fine, but don't expect me to stick around while you figure it out with another man." "James, wait," she started, but I cut her off. "No," I said firmly. "You made your choices, Emily. Now you have to live with them." I left the house, my chest heaving with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Driving aimlessly through the city, I found myself parked outside a quiet diner. Inside, over a cup of coffee, I replayed the night's events in my head, wondering where it had all gone so wrong. One thing was clear. This wasn't the end of our problems. It was only the beginning. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as I sat alone, the untouched coffee in front of me reflecting my darkening thoughts. Emily's tearful confessions from earlier replayed in my mind like a scratched record. Her words, her tone, her excuses, they were all variations of the same refrain. I didn't mean for this to happen. But intentions meant little when betrayal had already woven itself into the fabric of our marriage. When I returned home that night, Emily was asleep. or pretending to be. I didn't bother trying to speak to her. The rift between us felt insurmountable, and I wasn't ready to face another round of her justifications. Instead, I spent the night in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling and wondering what came next. The following morning, I was in the kitchen when Emily appeared, her face pale and her eyes rimmed red. She hesitated at the doorway, clutching a mug as if it were a lifeline. "Morning," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond right away. My focus remained on the coffee maker as it gurgled its last drops into the pot. Finally, I turned to face her. "We need to talk," I said evenly. Emily nodded, taking a seat at the kitchen table. I joined her, the silence between us thick with tension. "I've been thinking a lot," I began, my tone measured but firm, "about everything you said, about Ethan, and about what this all means for us." "James, Let me finish," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "You say you love me. You say you didn't mean for this to happen. But love isn't just a feeling, Emily, it's a commitment. It's choosing to honor the promises we made to each other, even when it's hard. And right now, it feels like you've abandoned that commitment." Her eyes filled with tears, but I pressed on. "Do you even realize what you're asking of me? To sit here and watch you find yourself with another man? To pretend that doesn't destroy everything we've built together?" "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "But you did," I shot back. "And you keep doing it. Every time you meet him, every time you lie to me, you're choosing him over us. Do you even see that?" Emily looked away, her hands gripping the edge of the table. For a moment I thought she might argue, but instead she whispered, "I don't know what to do." "Then let me make it simple for you," I said, leaning forward. "If you want to continue seeing him, you need to leave this house. I won't live under the same roof with someone who disrespects me like this." Her head snapped up, shock flashing across her face. "You're kicking me out?" "I'm giving you a choice," I corrected. "Stay here and work on fixing our marriage, or leave and pursue whatever it is you think you're missing. But you can't have both, Emily, not anymore." She stared at me, her expression a mix of anger and sadness. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said. "I can't believe you did this," I countered, my voice hardening. "You made these choices, Emily. Now you have to face the consequences." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy between us. Finally, Emily stood, her movements stiff and mechanical. "I need some time to think," she said quietly. "Take all the time you need," I replied, my tone cold. "But don't think for a second that I'll just sit here and wait for you to make up your mind. My patience has limits." She left the kitchen without another word, and I let out a long, shuddering breath. The confrontation had been inevitable, but it didn't make it any less painful. Later that day, I received a call from Megan. "I have something you need to see," she said, her tone serious. We met at a small cafe near her office where she handed me a file filled with photos and documents. "Ethan isn't just cheating on his wife with Emily," Megan explained. "He's been seeing multiple women, and there's more. His wife, Claire, has already filed for divorce. She's citing infidelity as the reason." I flipped through the file, my anger deepening with every page. Emily had entangled herself in a web of deceit far larger than I'd realized. "Does Emily know about this?" I asked. "Not yet," Megan replied. "But it's only a matter of time before Claire confronts her, or worse, takes legal action." The thought of Emily being publicly exposed was both satisfying and troubling. As much as I resented her choices, I didn't want her to suffer needlessly. But perhaps this was the wake-up call she needed. That evening, I returned home determined to confront Emily once more, armed with the knowledge Megan had provided. When she walked through the door, I was waiting in the living room, the file resting on the coffee table. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wary. "Proof," I said simply, "of who Ethan really is. Take a look, Emily. This is the man you've been throwing our marriage away for." She hesitated, then sat down and opened the file. Her face paled as she read through the documents, her hands trembling. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Because you deserve to know the truth," I said, "and because I want you to understand what you're really choosing." Her silence was deafening, but I didn't press her further. I had said all I needed to say. The rest was up to her. Emily sat frozen on the couch, the file still open in her lap. Her eyes scanned the damning documents, but her expression was unreadable, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something else I couldn't quite place. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. "You didn't have to do this, James," she finally said, her voice a whisper. "Didn't I?" I replied, leaning forward in my chair. "Emily, you didn't just jeopardize our marriage. You walked blindly into a mess you didn't even understand. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the lies, the manipulation, and the people you've entangled yourself with. You needed to know the truth." Her hands trembled as she closed the file, setting it on the coffee table. "I didn't know," she said, her voice cracking. "You didn't care to know," I countered. "You chose to trust a man who's been playing multiple women while you tore apart everything we built together. What did you think was going to happen, Emily? That this would somehow fix the emptiness you've been feeling?" She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For a brief moment I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by the bitterness that had been growing inside me for weeks. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted, her voice muffled. "I do," I said firmly, "but it's going to take more than words. You can't keep running away from your choices, Emily. You have to face them head on." Her tear-streaked face lifted, her eyes searching mine. "What do you want me to do?" "For starters," I said, "you need to cut ties with Ethan, completely. No texts, no calls, no closure meetings. He's toxic, and he's already destroyed enough lives." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "Okay, I'll end it. And Jessica," I continued, my tone unyielding, "her influence on you has been nothing but destructive. You need to take a hard look at the people you're letting into your life and ask yourself if they're helping you or hurting you." Her silence was telling, and I knew the answer without her saying a word. The next day, Emily called in sick to work. I didn't ask why, but I could hear her pacing the house as I worked from my home office. Around midday, she came to me, her face pale but resolute. "I told Ethan it's over," she said, "and I told Jessica I need some space." I nodded, acknowledging her effort without offering praise. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. While Emily began the process of disentangling herself from her mistakes, I took my own steps to regain control of my life. David helped me draft a post-nuptial agreement to protect my financial assets should Emily relapse into her reckless behavior. I also started attending individual therapy sessions, hoping to make sense of my own emotions and find a path forward. Megan continued her work in the background, gathering additional evidence on Ethan and the women he'd been manipulating. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that his actions weren't just immoral, they bordered on predatory. Armed with this information, I contacted his wife, Claire, and shared what we'd found. "I knew he was cheating," Claire said, her voice heavy with emotion. "But I didn't know the extent of it. Thank you for telling me." Claire's strength surprised me. Instead of breaking down, she resolved to hold Ethan accountable, not just in their divorce, but legally. She filed a formal complaint against him with his real estate firm, exposing his behavior to his colleagues and clients. The fallout was swift. Ethan's reputation crumbled, and he was forced to resign. It wasn't revenge, it was justice, a reminder that actions have consequences. Back at home, Emily's behavior began to shift. She was quieter, more introspective, and for the first time in years, she seemed genuinely remorseful. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "James," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand, but I want to try to make things right." Her words were sincere, but they didn't erase the pain she'd caused. "Emily," I said, my tone measured, "forgiveness isn't something I can give you overnight. It's something you'll have to earn. And it's not just about me. It's about you proving to yourself that you can be better." She nodded, her gaze steady despite the tears. "I will," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes." As she spoke, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in weeks, hope. It was fragile, like a sapling just beginning to grow, but it was there. Whether it would survive the storms ahead remained to be seen. For now, the tables had turned. The power dynamic that had once left me feeling helpless was shifting, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own story. Emily's tearful promise to do whatever it took to make things right hung in the air like a fragile thread. While I didn't doubt her sincerity in that moment, I knew better than to let my guard down. Words were easy. Actions, sustained over time, would be the true test. Still, her acknowledgement of her mistakes was a step in the right direction, and it allowed me to focus on something I hadn't thought about in weeks: myself. The tension at home remained palpable, and I found myself needing an outlet, something to remind me of who I was outside of the crumbling marriage. That's how I ended up at the cycling club. I'd joined years ago, but had gradually let it fall by the wayside as work and life piled on. Now, it felt like a lifeline. On my first ride back, the brisk Colorado air filled my lungs as the group of riders moved like a rhythmic machine through the rolling trails. For the first time in weeks, my thoughts weren't consumed by Emily or Ethan or the wreckage of my marriage. One rider, Samantha Reed, caught my attention. She had a quiet confidence about her, her pace steady and her smile warm. We struck up a conversation during a break, and I learned she was a pediatric nurse at a local hospital. She spoke passionately about her work, her voice lighting up as she shared stories of the kids she cared for. It was refreshing, talking to someone who wasn't caught up in their own problems but genuinely cared about others. "You seem like you've got a lot on your mind," Samantha said, her tone gentle but probing. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, it's been a rough few months." She didn't press for details, simply offering, "Cycling helps. There's something about moving forward, even when you feel stuck." Her words stayed with me long after the ride ended. That evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I realized how much I needed that fresh perspective. Someone who reminded me that there was more to life than the mess I was currently wading through. Emily, for her part, was trying. She had stopped seeing Jessica entirely, a fact she made sure to emphasize during one of our tense kitchen conversations. "I've blocked her number," she said, her tone almost defensive. I realized she wasn't helping me. She was just feeding into my worst instincts. "That's good," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She looked at me, her eyes searching for approval, but I didn't offer it. I wasn't ready. At therapy, my counselor encouraged me to focus on setting boundaries and finding balance. "You can't control Emily's actions," she said, "but you can control how you respond to them. It's important to carve out space for yourself, to reconnect with what makes you happy." Samantha and I continued to cross paths at the cycling club, and our conversations grew longer and more personal. She never pried, but her calm presence made it easy to open up. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling ride, we grabbed coffee at a small cafe near the trailhead. "How are things at home?" she asked, her tone careful but genuine. "Complicated," I admitted. "Emily's trying to fix things, but it's hard to know if it's enough." "That's a tough spot to be in," Samantha said, her expression thoughtful. "It's okay to take your time figuring it out. You don't have to have all the answers right away." Her words were a balm, a reminder that I didn't need to carry the weight of everything alone. At home, Emily noticed the change in me. "You seem lighter," she said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "Maybe I am," I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. She nodded, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, James." It was a small moment, but it felt significant. An acknowledgement that my happiness mattered too. As weeks turned into months, I found myself looking forward to those cycling rides and the moments of clarity they brought. Samantha became a steady presence in my life, her kindness and perspective offering a stark contrast to the chaos I'd been navigating. Emily, meanwhile, continued her efforts to rebuild the trust she had shattered. She started therapy on her own and even suggested we try couples counseling, a step I reluctantly agreed to. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a looming storm. It wasn't clear and it wasn't certain, but it was mine to shape. Emily's efforts to rebuild our relationship were visible, but they often felt hollow, a surface-level attempt to regain the semblance of what we once had. Therapy, blocked numbers, and promises were all good in theory, but they didn't erase the past. Despite her actions, the trust between us was fragile, like glass that had been shattered and pieced together with cracks still visible. But the truth has a way of bubbling to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. One evening, Megan called with an update that sent my stomach plummeting. "James, there's something you need to know," she began, her tone cautious. "Ethan's wife Claire filed for divorce last week, but Ethan is still actively pursuing Emily. I have proof he's contacted her multiple times in the last few days." I pinched the bridge of my nose, my patience fraying. "Emily said she ended things with him," I replied, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "She might have tried, but Ethan isn't letting go," Megan said. "I thought you should see this." The email came through moments later. It included screenshots of text messages between Emily and Ethan. At first glance, they seemed one-sided. Ethan reaching out, Emily responding minimally. But then, toward the bottom of the thread, her tone shifted. She didn't outright reject him. In fact, there was a softness in her responses, a willingness to engage. "Let's meet one last time to talk," she had written. It was all the proof I needed to know that despite her claims, she hadn't fully let go of him. When I confronted Emily that night, her defenses went up immediately. "James, I swear I didn't mean for it to happen again," she pleaded. "He wouldn't stop contacting me. I thought if I just talked to him one last time, he'd leave me alone." "Do you even hear yourself?" I snapped. "You're still justifying this, still making excuses for him and for yourself. How can I believe anything you say when you keep betraying me over and over again?" She broke down in tears, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Her choices had brought us to this point, and my empathy was running on fumes. The following week, the fallout from Ethan's actions began to ripple through our small community. Claire had gone public with details of his infidelity, naming names in a scathing social media post that quickly went viral. Emily's name was among them. The reactions were swift and merciless. Friends, co-workers, and even neighbors distanced themselves from her. Parents at the school where she worked expressed concerns, questioning her judgment and moral integrity. She was called into a meeting with the school board, and though they couldn't fire her outright, the scrutiny was intense. At home, Emily's once confident demeanor began to crumble. She withdrew into herself, spending long hours in the bedroom or staring blankly at the television. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, some from Jessica, others from mutual acquaintances who wanted to know her side of the story. One evening, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. "I don't know how to fix this, James," she said, her voice barely audible. "You can't undo what's been done," I replied, my tone colder than I intended. "All you can do is decide what kind of person you want to be moving forward." "But what if I've already lost everything?" she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "That's up to you," I said simply. Over the next few weeks, Emily's downward spiral continued. The stress and isolation began to take a toll on her health. She lost weight, her once vibrant energy replaced by a weary resignation. I suggested she take a leave of absence from work to focus on herself, but she resisted, clinging to the semblance of normalcy her job provided. Meanwhile, I leaned more heavily on my newfound cycling community and my growing friendship with Samantha. She became a source of stability, her kindness and empathy a stark contrast to the chaos at home. One evening, after a particularly grueling ride, Samantha and I sat on a park bench overlooking the city. "You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved," she said gently, her words cutting through the fog of my thoughts. I nodded, knowing she was right. Emily's choices were her own, and while I had tried to support her, there was a limit to what I could endure. The cracks in our marriage had deepened into chasms, and for the first time, I began to accept that some things couldn't be mended. Emily's downward spiral marked a turning point, not just for her, but for me as well. Watching her unravel made it clear that I could no longer shoulder the burden of saving a marriage she had already abandoned in all but name. I had spent months drowning in anger and heartbreak, but somewhere along the way I realized I had a choice: to continue carrying the weight of her decisions or to set it down and start fresh. One morning, after yet another sleepless night, I decided it was time to make a change. I called David and asked him to begin drafting the divorce papers. The decision wasn't easy, but it felt necessary, a step toward reclaiming my life. When I told Emily later that evening, she didn't react the way I expected. There was no argument, no desperate plea to make things right. Instead, she simply nodded, her expression a mixture of resignation and relief. "I understand," she said quietly. "I've hurt you too much to expect you to stay." Her acceptance, while surprising, reinforced my decision. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. In the weeks that followed, the legal process moved forward with surprising smoothness. We agreed on a fair division of assets, and Emily moved out of the house, renting a small apartment across town. While the separation was painful, it also brought a sense of closure, a chance to finally start healing. During this time, my connection with Samantha deepened. What had started as a friendship built on shared interests grew into something more. She was a steady presence in my life, her warmth and empathy a stark contrast to the chaos I had endured. One Saturday, after a particularly challenging cycling route, we stopped by a quiet lake to rest. The water shimmered in the afternoon sun, and the air was filled with the soft rustle of leaves. "I haven't felt this at peace in a long time," I admitted, breaking the comfortable silence between us. Samantha smiled, her green eyes sparkling. "You've been through a lot, James. It's okay to take time to just be." Her words resonated deeply. For so long I had been consumed by the need to fix things, to hold on to a relationship that was already broken. But now, for the first time, I felt free to let go. As the months passed, my life began to take on a new rhythm. I threw myself into work, taking on a promotion that allowed me to travel and meet new people. The cycling club became a source of joy and camaraderie, and my evenings were no longer filled with tension and unanswered questions. Emily, meanwhile, seemed to be finding her own path. While we rarely spoke, mutual friends occasionally shared updates about her. She had started therapy and was slowly rebuilding her life. Knowing she was taking steps to heal didn't erase the pain she had caused, but it gave me a sense of closure. One evening, as I sat on my back patio with Samantha, sipping wine and watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever regret how things ended with Emily?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment, the weight of the past settling lightly on my shoulders. "No," I said finally. "I regret the pain we caused each other, but I don't regret letting go. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is to let them find their own way, even if it's without you." Samantha reached for my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "I think that's incredibly brave," she said. It wasn't bravery, I realized. It was acceptance of the past, of my choices, and of the possibility of a future filled with happiness and peace. Months later, as the divorce was finalized, I stood in my newly furnished home reflecting on how much had changed. The walls were no longer adorned with photos of Emily and me, but with art that reflected my own tastes. The space felt like mine, a sanctuary I had reclaimed. Samantha joined me that evening, bringing a bottle of champagne to celebrate. As we toasted to new beginnings, I felt a sense of gratitude, not just for her, but for the journey that had brought me to this moment. My marriage to Emily had been a chapter in my life, a painful one, but also a transformative one. It taught me about resilience, about self-worth, and about the importance of letting go. And now, as I stood on the precipice of a new chapter, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next. The day the divorce papers were finalized felt surreal. I sat in my lawyer's office, pen in hand, signing the last of the documents that officially marked the end of my marriage to Emily. The process had been amicable, even cordial, but that didn't make it any less emotional. As I handed the signed papers back to David, a wave of relief washed over me, tempered by a quiet sadness for what had been lost. Driving home, I thought about everything that had led me to this moment. The love Emily and I had shared, the promises we'd made, and the pain of watching it all unravel. It was a chapter of my life I would carry with me forever, but it no longer defined me. Samantha was waiting for me when I arrived. She greeted me with a soft smile and a hug that felt like a lifeline. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. "Lighter," I admitted. "It's strange, but I feel free." "Good," she said, squeezing my hand. You deserve to feel that way. The next few weeks were a blur of change and renewal. I took on new projects at work, filling my days with purpose and momentum. Samantha and I grew closer, our relationship deepening as we navigated this new phase of our lives. She was a constant source of support, her presence grounding me in ways I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, as we sat together on the patio, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Have you thought about seeing Emily?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. Why would I do that? Not to rekindle anything, she clarified, but to find closure. For both of you. The idea lingered in my mind over the next few days. While I didn't feel the need to confront Emily, I realized there was value in ending things on a note of understanding. So I sent her a message asking if she'd be open to meeting for coffee. To my surprise, she agreed. We met at a small cafe in town, the same place we'd celebrated anniversaries and milestones in happier times. Emily looked different, thinner, quieter, her once confident demeanor replaced by a tentative humility. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as we sat down. "Of course," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. The conversation started slowly, filled with small talk and awkward pauses. But eventually, the walls between us began to lower. Emily spoke about her struggles, her regrets, and the lessons she had learned. She admitted how much she had hurt me, and for the first time her apology felt genuine. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, her voice trembling. "But I needed you to know how sorry I am." I nodded, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. "I appreciate that," I said, "and I want you to know, I don't hate you, Emily. I did for a while, but I realized that holding on to that anger was only hurting me. I want us both to move forward, even if it's apart." Her eyes glistened with tears, but she smiled, a small, bittersweet expression that felt like a shared understanding. When we parted ways, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The chapter with Emily had closed, not with bitterness, but with a quiet acceptance of what had been and what would never be again. Life moved forward with a steady rhythm. Samantha and I planned a weekend trip to the mountains, a chance to step away from the daily grind and focus on our growing bond. On the drive up, we talked about everything, our hopes, our fears, our dreams for the future. As we hiked through the serene forest trails, surrounded by the vibrant colors of autumn, I realized how far I had come. The pain of the past still lingered, but it no longer weighed me down. In its place was a newfound sense of strength and resilience, a belief in the possibility of happiness and renewal. That evening, as we sat by the fire, Samantha turned to me with a soft smile. "You seem different," she said, "like you've finally found your footing." "I think I have," I replied, my gaze steady. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm where I'm meant to be." She reached for my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "I'm glad," she said. As the fire crackled and the stars began to emerge in the night sky, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for Samantha, but for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The past was no longer a chain holding me back. It was a part of my story, but it wasn't the end. In its place was a blank page ready to be filled with new adventures, new dreams, and a renewed belief in the power of love and resilience. The crisp mountain air lingered in my lungs as Samantha and I packed up the cabin the following morning. Our weekend had been a reprieve from the chaos of life, a chance to reset and reflect. As we loaded the car, I felt a sense of clarity that had eluded me for far too long. The drive back to the city was quiet, punctuated by moments of shared laughter and comfortable silence. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. The shadows of the past had finally receded, leaving room for the light to pour in. Returning home, I found myself settling into a life that felt new yet familiar. The house, once filled with memories of Emily, had transformed into a space that reflected my journey. Every corner, every photo on the wall told a story of growth, resilience, and the promise of new beginnings. One afternoon, as I sorted through a box of old belongings, I stumbled upon a framed photo of Emily and me on our wedding day. I studied it for a moment, the smiles on our faces a stark contrast to the pain that had come later. Without hesitation, I wrapped the frame in newspaper and placed it in the donation pile. It wasn't an act of bitterness. It was a release, a way of saying goodbye to a chapter that no longer defined me. In the weeks that followed, Samantha and I continued to build a life together. She met my friends, seamlessly integrating into the social circles that had once been mine alone. Her presence was effortless, her kindness a balm for the wounds I hadn't realized were still healing. One evening, as we sat on the patio, Samantha reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. "What's this?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Open it and see," she said, her smile teasing. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with my initials. "I thought you might want a place to write," she explained, "to capture everything you've been through and everything that's still to come." Her thoughtfulness brought a lump to my throat. I leaned over and kissed her gently, the words "thank you" feeling inadequate but heartfelt. That journal became a daily ritual. Each morning I poured my thoughts onto its pages, chronicling not just the struggles but the moments of joy and triumph that had carried me forward. It became a space to reflect, to dream, and to plan for the future. One morning, as I flipped through its pages, I realized just how far I'd come. The entries from the early days were filled with anger and despair, but as the pages turned, the tone shifted. Gratitude replaced bitterness. Hope replaced sorrow. Emily and I still crossed paths occasionally, though our interactions were polite and distant. She seemed to be doing better, her life on a different trajectory. Seeing her no longer stirred feelings of resentment. Instead, I felt a quiet gratitude for the lessons she had unknowingly taught me about love, forgiveness, and self-worth. The final piece of closure came on a rainy afternoon when I received a letter from Emily. It was handwritten, the script shaky but sincere. In it, she thanked me for the time we had shared, acknowledged the pain she had caused, and expressed her hope that I had found happiness. She didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation, just a chance to let go. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of the journal Samantha had given me. It wasn't something I needed to dwell on, but it felt right to keep it, a reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the heartbreak, the rebuilding. It had all led to this moment, where I stood on the threshold of a life filled with possibility. Samantha and I toasted to the new year under a sky filled with fireworks, the colors reflecting in her eyes as she leaned into me. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. "To us," I replied, my heart full. In that moment I realized that closure wasn't just about endings. It was about making space for the things that truly mattered. And as I looked at Samantha, I knew I had finally found what I'd been searching for all along. A love built not on illusions or compromises, but on trust, respect, and the simple, profound joy of being seen for who I truly was.